The Galactic Empire was vast, its reach stretching across entire sectors of the galaxy. It was an entity built on dominance, ruthlessness, and power. Humanity, by contrast, was young, a fledgling species who had barely begun to stretch its wings beyond its home planet. But humanity had ambition, and its leaders believed that diplomacy, rather than conflict, could establish Earth's place among the stars. The human diplomat was chosen for this mission because of his calm demeanor, his ability to understand others, and his skill in negotiation. His reputation was solid. He had brokered peace deals on Earth, defused political tensions, and gained the trust of many foreign nations. The mission to the Galactic Empire was to be a test of humanity's diplomatic might. Earth hoped that through peaceful negotiations, they could avoid becoming another victim of the Empire's expansionist tendencies. The diplomat had no illusions about the difficulty of this task. The Empire's record was far from peaceful, but the human representatives on this mission believed that peace was still a possibility. Earth's leaders had briefed him on all potential contingencies, from the hostile to the unexpectedly favorable. But nothing had prepared him for what he would face on this monumental day. As he and his delegation arrived at the Grand Space Station, orbiting an uninhabited planet on the outskirts of the Empire's capital, there was a palpable sense of both excitement and trepidation. This was the meeting that could define humanity's future. Would they be able to secure an alliance with one of the most powerful regimes in the galaxy, or would they find themselves cast aside, irrelevant in the face of overwhelming force? The Empire's representatives were as alien as one could imagine. Their cold, calculated demeanor, their distant manner of speaking, and their impeccable attire gave an air of superiority. The humans, in contrast, were eager yet cautious, aware of the stakes. The negotiations began with the usual pleasantries, formalities exchanged, and promises of cooperation laid on the table. It was all surface level, but the diplomat was experienced enough to see the subtle signs of condescension. They weren't interested in partnership, they were interested in submission. The Empire's officials made it clear that while they would entertain talks, they were under no obligation to offer any meaningful concessions. They were open to discussing trade, of course, but their true intentions lay in securing the Empire's continued dominance, which meant that Earth would have to accept its position as subordinate. The human diplomat, undeterred, pushed for mutual respect and equality, reminding the Empire that humanity had quickly advanced in technology and military might. Yet, the more he spoke, the clearer it became that the Empire wasn't interested in diplomacy at all. They saw the humans as insignificant, as a minor nuisance at best. The human diplomat carefully weighed his words, sensing the tension building. What started as a seemingly cordial exchange had begun to feel more like an interrogation. The Empire's representatives weren't listening. They were simply waiting for humanity to bow, to show any sign of weakness. At one point, a particularly high-ranking official leaned forward, his tone dripping with disdain. "Your species is young, but your leaders believe they can stand among us. You may have your technology, but your ignorance will be your undoing." The words stung, but the diplomat kept his composure. Humanity had fought for its place in the universe, and no insult would deter him from seeking peace. But as the meeting continued, it became increasingly clear that peace wasn't the goal. The Empire's rhetoric turned more pointed, and the delegation began to sense that something was amiss. There were subtle threats in every sentence, suggestions that if humanity wasn't willing to accept the Empire's terms, they would suffer the consequences. Just as the human diplomat was about to call for a recess to regroup, a sudden shift in the room's atmosphere was palpable. The doors to the conference chamber opened, and 2 guards entered, escorting a person in handcuffs. The diplomat's eyes widened as he recognized the individual, a member of the human delegation, accused by the Empire of espionage. The sight of the prisoner made the diplomat's heart sink. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a setup. Before anyone could react, the Empire's officials gave a signal, and the prisoner was shot dead in front of everyone. The gunfire echoed in the chamber, sending shockwaves through the human delegation. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, as if the galaxy itself had momentarily held its breath. The diplomat's mind raced. What had just happened? The execution of a human, without trial, without due process, in the very room where peace talks were supposed to unfold.
It was a statement.
The Empire was making it clear. There was no place for humanity here, no room for negotiation. This was not about diplomacy. This was about dominance. As the Empire's representatives calmly returned to their seats, the shock was still evident on the faces of the human delegates. No one spoke. The diplomat's heart pounded in his chest as he slowly turned to his colleagues, exchanging looks of disbelief. It had all been a lie. The Empire was not interested in peace. It was interested in crushing any resistance, and humanity was now its enemy. The diplomat stood frozen, his mind reeling. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had been trained for difficult negotiations, for the art of diplomacy, but this was something else entirely. He could feel the eyes of the Empire's officials watching him, waiting for him to react, expecting him to submit. But there would be no submission. Humanity wouldn't bend to this. Not after everything they had fought for. The diplomat raised his chin, his gaze hardening. There was no more pretending. The time for negotiations had passed. His people had been insulted, and their trust had been betrayed. But he wasn't about to let this go unchallenged. There had to be a response. Humanity would fight back. They would not be cowed. The meeting ended in chaos as the human delegation was escorted out, their safety no longer guaranteed. As the diplomat left the chamber, he couldn't help but think about the future. What had once been a diplomatic mission had now become a declaration of war. The Empire had just ensured that humanity would never be the same. But it was not just the loss of a single life. It was the spark that would ignite a war that humanity had not asked for, but would fight with everything it had. This was not a moment of surrender. This was a moment of defiance. The human diplomat knew one thing for certain. The Empire had made a grave mistake. News of the diplomat's assassination spread across Earth with a ferocity that sent shockwaves through the entire planet. The peaceful nature of humanity, its long-standing desire to avoid conflict, was now shattered by an event so violent and brazen that it could not be ignored. It wasn't just the death of one man, it was an affront to the entire species. The brutal, cold-blooded execution in front of Earth's delegates had sealed humanity's fate. Peace was no longer an option. The Empire had declared war, not with weapons, but with bloodshed. Across the globe, world leaders convened to discuss how best to respond. The usual rhetoric of diplomacy and restraint seemed hollow now. The loss was too great. The Empire's actions weren't just a diplomatic snub, they were a threat to Earth's very existence. The human spirit was being tested, and it was time to decide whether to shrink in fear or stand tall. The speeches that followed were filled with anger and resolve, calling for unity and strength in the face of the Empire's cruelty. The President of Earth, standing before a global audience, delivered a speech that would forever be etched into humanity's collective memory. We are not a species that will bend, that will grovel before tyranny. Our diplomat's life was taken, but it is our resolve that will now be tested. We will not be cowed. The Empire has made its intentions clear. If they want war, then war they shall have. The speech was not just about retaliation. It was a rallying cry, a message to the entire planet that Earth would not be silent in the face of oppression. As the words echoed across every continent, Earth's military apparatus went into overdrive. Plans that had once been reserved for the distant future were hastily pulled together. Humanity was not prepared for an all-out war with an empire so vast, so powerful. Yet, there was an undeniable strength in the way Earth mobilized its forces. Military leaders, who had once been focused on exploration and defense, now turned their attention to war. The Empire had underestimated humanity, and now humanity would show them what it meant to fight for survival. In the war rooms of the human fleet, a sense of urgency permeated the air. The immediate goal was clear: retaliation. The enemy was powerful, its military fleets towering and vast, but the human fleet had one advantage: their adaptability. Humanity was not bound by tradition or protocol. They could innovate in ways the Empire's rigid bureaucracy could not. It was in their ability to think outside the box that Earth's leaders placed their faith. The Empire's arrogance had created an opening, and humanity was poised to exploit it. The decision to strike back was not taken lightly. For days, military leaders and strategists debated the most effective course of action. They could not afford to make mistakes, and with the Empire's superior numbers and resources, a direct confrontation seemed like suicide. The solution lay in precision, stealth, and surprise. The Empire might have the bigger fleet, but humanity had something more valuable: the ability to outthink their adversaries. A series of tactical maneuvers was planned that would exploit the Empire's reliance on sheer firepower and overwhelming force. Meanwhile, across Earth, emotions ran high. Families mourned the loss of loved ones, soldiers readied themselves for battle, and civilians rallied behind their leaders. There was a palpable sense of unity, as if the entire planet had been awakened to a singular purpose. It wasn't just about the diplomat, it was about human dignity. The Empire had crossed a line, and now Earth had no choice but to fight. This was the moment when humanity would show the galaxy that it would not back down. The calls for peace had been drowned out by the overwhelming chorus of anger and determination. The human delegation, upon returning to Earth, was met with cheers, but the mood was somber. They had witnessed the Empire's brutality firsthand, and now they carried the weight of that loss. Yet, as much as their grief ran deep, there was something else: a sense of purpose. The Empire had underestimated them, but humanity had a history of resilience, of surviving against all odds. The stakes had been raised, and the question was no longer whether humanity could survive, it was whether the Empire could. In the corridors of power, decisions were being made, and they were decisions that would alter the course of history. It was clear that no diplomatic solution would suffice. The Empire had shown its true colors, and now Earth had to prepare for the inevitable clash. But there was no sense of fear among the leaders. Instead, there was a collective resolve. This was not just a war for survival. It was a war to define humanity's place in the galaxy. The human fleet, while smaller and less technologically advanced than the Empire's, was now being augmented with cutting-edge technology. Ships that had once been built for exploration were retrofitted with weapon systems. They were not the massive warships that the Empire had at its disposal, but they were swift, maneuverable, and highly adaptable. Humanity had no choice but to use its ingenuity and resourcefulness to fight back. The Empire, meanwhile, remained dismissive of humanity's actions. Their leaders viewed the humans as little more than an inconvenience, a nuisance that would soon be crushed under the weight of their power. Yet, in their arrogance, they had failed to grasp the true nature of humanity. The Empire might have the resources, the military might, but humanity had something far more dangerous: unity. The death of a single diplomat had sparked a fire that could not be extinguished. As Earth's forces prepared for their first confrontation, there was a sense of purpose, of inevitability. The battle for survival had begun, and humanity was not about to let its future slip away without a fight. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and soon, the galaxy would see exactly what humanity was capable of when pushed to the brink. The human fleet was ready. The Empire would soon learn the price of underestimating Earth. There would be no turning back now. The human fleet, though smaller and less advanced than the Galactic Empire's, was now on the move. Earth's decision was final, and there would be no turning back. Humanity had declared war, and they intended to show the Empire that their arrogance would come at a price. The first few skirmishes were brief, intense, and brutal. The Empire's massive warships were more than a match for the smaller human vessels, but Earth's fleet was nimble and full of surprises. The Empire, used to overwhelming its enemies with sheer firepower, was caught off guard by the tactical ingenuity and resourcefulness of humanity. In the opening engagements, the human ships proved far more maneuverable than the Empire's ponderous dreadnoughts. They used their agility to evade the Empire's heavy bombardments and launched precise, coordinated strikes on vulnerable points. The Empire's commanders, overconfident in their technological superiority, underestimated the humans' ability to think on their feet. They relied on brute force, which played into the hands of the humans, who exploited weaknesses with surgical precision. The first victory came unexpectedly. A human admiral, leading a small fleet, used the debris field of a nearby destroyed moon as cover. The Empire fleet, accustomed to overwhelming force, never anticipated that humanity would use such a strategy. The ambush was swift and decisive. Two of the Empire's dreadnoughts were disabled in the opening moments, their shields cracked, their communication systems scrambled by EMP blasts. The human fleet struck with surgical precision, targeting critical systems, and before the Empire had a chance to react, the humans withdrew, leaving behind a crippled fleet and an enraged enemy. The victory was a huge morale booster for humanity, proving that they could not only survive but could strike back. The news spread across Earth like wildfire, igniting a sense of unity and determination that had been lacking in the early stages of the war. Citizens who had once doubted the viability of humanity's war efforts now rallied behind the cause. The realization set in: the Empire was not invincible, and humanity was not as weak as they had been led to believe. But while humanity celebrated its early successes, the Empire was quick to adapt. They sent reinforcements, more advanced fleets, and their most ruthless commanders. The Empire's generals were not going to make the same mistake again. They would not underestimate the humans a second time. The next battle would be different. The Empire, now fully aware of the humans' tactics, responded with overwhelming force. The human fleet, however, did not falter. Instead, they adapted once again. Earth's military commanders knew that they couldn't engage in prolonged, direct combat with the Empire. The key to victory lay in exploiting the Empire's dependence on numbers and firepower. Human tactics were based on hit-and-run engagements, using superior knowledge of the terrain, making swift attacks on vital infrastructure, and retreating before the Empire could bring their full might to bear. The humans knew that they would lose a battle of attrition. They had to outsmart the Empire at every turn. The strategy worked. One of the most effective tactics was the use of decoys and misdirection. The human fleet would send out small groups of ships to feign an attack, only to disappear into nearby asteroid fields or use cloaking technology to hide their true positions. The Empire's fleet, large and slow, would waste precious time and resources trying to track down these phantom forces, only to discover that they had been tricked. While the Empire's attention was diverted, the human forces would strike at weak points in the Empire's command infrastructure, dismantling key communication hubs and disabling supply lines. Despite the Empire's superior resources, the human fleet had one advantage the Empire didn't: speed. Humanity's ships were smaller and more agile, capable of striking fast and then retreating before the enemy could mount a response. This hit-and-run strategy kept the Empire on the defensive, forcing them to spread their forces thin and react to each new threat rather than dictate the terms of the war. As the weeks passed, the Empire began to experience the strain of having to fight a war of attrition against an enemy that refused to be pinned down. The battles, though smaller in scale than the Empire's typical campaigns, were taking a toll on their morale. Each engagement left the Empire's commanders more frustrated, more desperate. Humanity was not backing down. In fact, the longer the war dragged on, the more determined humanity became. The tide of the war began to shift as humanity's intelligence networks infiltrated the Empire's command structure. The Empire had assumed that Earth's resources were limited, but they hadn't accounted for the depth of humanity's ingenuity. The humans were relentless in gathering information, learning about the Empire's tactics, and exploiting every vulnerability. One of the turning points came when a group of human engineers managed to hack into the Empire's flagship's communication systems. The human forces intercepted sensitive intelligence, revealing the Empire's battle plans for an upcoming large-scale offensive. With this information in hand, the human fleet was able to launch a preemptive strike, disrupting the Empire's offensive before it even began. This victory, though costly, was a testament to the resilience of humanity. They had taken the fight to the Empire's doorstep and had succeeded. The Empire was now forced to reconsider its entire strategy. Their attempts to crush humanity through sheer force had failed, and they had lost the element of surprise. The human fleet had proven itself a formidable opponent, capable of adapting and overcoming every obstacle the Empire placed in its way. The Galactic Empire had once seen humanity as an insignificant, primitive species. Now, they were learning that underestimating Earth had been their greatest mistake. But even as humanity's military leaders began to look toward the future with renewed hope, they knew that the war was far from over. The Empire would not back down easily. They were a vast, well-organized force with nearly unlimited resources, and they had only just begun to mobilize their full might. Humanity's resilience had proven itself on the battlefield, but there were far more battles to come. The Empire was now aware that they could not simply crush humanity with their fleets. The war would not be won with firepower alone. But humanity had something the Empire could never understand: the will to survive. And that would be enough to keep fighting. The war had escalated, but humanity's resolve remained unshaken. The initial phases of the conflict had been marked by surprising victories, quick tactical strikes, and the Empire's underestimation of Earth's ability to adapt. However, the Empire, a vast and ancient force, was not easily defeated. It had regrouped, reorganized, and brought its most formidable fleets to bear on humanity. The battle for Earth's survival had become more brutal, and the stakes were higher than ever. The humans had learned much from their early engagements, but they were now faced with the full might of the Empire. The Empire's new strategy was relentless. It began to employ more direct, large-scale assaults, overwhelming humanity's forces with sheer numbers. The human fleet, which had once relied on guerrilla tactics, found itself stretched thin. The smaller, more agile human ships, though highly effective in hit-and-run engagements, were no match for the Empire's colossal dreadnoughts and battlecruisers in prolonged confrontations. The battlefields had shifted from asteroid belts and distant moons to the very planets humanity was sworn to protect. But even as the Empire tightened its grip, there was something the Empire had not accounted for: Earth's civilians. Across the globe, the citizens of Earth had rallied in ways the Empire could never have imagined. The human spirit, fueled by grief and the need for survival, had ignited a worldwide resistance effort. People who had once been civilians, scientists, doctors, and engineers now stood shoulder to shoulder with soldiers in the fight to protect their homes. In the war's darkest hours, it became clear that Earth's military was not the only force capable of striking back. Humanity's greatest asset was not only its military ingenuity, but its vast civilian infrastructure. Engineers and inventors, many of whom had never seen a battlefield, were contributing their knowledge in ways that tipped the balance. New weapons were developed, systems were hacked, and technological innovations emerged at a rate that stunned even the Empire's intelligence apparatus. Humanity had no choice but to adapt quickly, and in doing so, they found new ways to fight back. The Empire, with all its advanced technology, was still not prepared for the unpredictable nature of Earth's resourcefulness. The human resistance found cracks in the Empire's armor, literal and metaphorical. While the Empire relied on brute strength, humanity relied on its determination and creativity. The war was no longer about matching firepower, but about outsmarting the enemy at every turn. Human ingenuity became their greatest weapon. One of the most significant turning points came when a group of human scientists developed a new type of energy weapon. It was not a conventional laser or plasma cannon, but something far more sophisticated. This weapon was capable of disabling entire fleets by disrupting the core systems of the Empire's ships. The Empire's reliance on centralized command and control systems made it vulnerable to this new technology. When the weapon was first deployed in battle, it caused massive damage to the Empire's ships, disabling their most advanced vessels and forcing the Empire to reconsider its tactical approach. But the Empire's countermeasures came swiftly. The power of the Empire's military was undeniable, and their retaliation was brutal. They unleashed wave after wave of assault, intent on breaking the human will. Yet, the longer the war dragged on, the more humanity found itself rallying. There was no retreat, no surrender. The human fleet might have been smaller, but it was more motivated than ever. The Empire's forces, as vast as they were, began to show signs of fatigue. The relentless campaigns were taking a toll on their soldiers, and the morale of the Empire's commanders was beginning to wane. Humanity, for all its perceived weakness, was proving that it was not easily crushed. The longer the war went on, the more the Empire's leaders began to question their initial assumptions. Humanity had surprised them at every turn, and the tide of the war had slowly begun to shift in Earth's favor. It was no longer just about military engagement. It was about a war of attrition, where the Empire's resources were stretched thin and its supply lines were constantly under attack. Earth's final victory would not be decided by one battle or by superior technology alone. It would be determined by humanity's ability to outlast the Empire. The longer the war went on, the more resources the Empire expended, the more its will was tested. And as the Empire faltered, the cracks in its foundation grew larger. The human resolve had proven to be more resilient than the Empire had ever imagined. By the time the Empire's fleet arrived at Earth's doorstep for what they hoped would be the final, crushing blow, humanity was ready. The human fleet, now bolstered by every last resource Earth had to offer, had been preparing for this moment. The final battle was not about numbers or firepower, it was about survival. Humanity knew that if they lost, their way of life would be extinguished forever. There was no room for failure. The last fight was brutal. It raged for days, with humanity's forces throwing everything they had left at the Empire. The final push was as much psychological as it was physical. The Empire's commanders, who had once viewed humanity as insignificant, now realized the truth. Earth would never surrender. The final moments of the war were not just a matter of military might, but of willpower. Humanity's spirit had been tested, and it had endured. In the end, the Galactic Empire, unable to maintain its hold, was forced to retreat. Earth had won. It had taken every ounce of humanity's resilience, every bit of creativity and innovation, and the strength of a united planet to push back against an empire that had once considered them nothing more than a footnote in the galaxy's history. The victory was not just one of military strategy, but of human spirit. The Galactic Empire had underestimated humanity, believing that sheer power could break them. What they failed to realize was that humanity's true strength lay not in its technology or its armies, but in its refusal to back down. The Empire had learned the hard way that humanity would never be broken. The war had ended, but the message was clear. Humanity would not be silenced. It would fight, it would survive, and it would rise.